Thing turn around this one. Okay, that's us. So hello everyone, and welcome to our final book conversation on contemplative gardening by the Reverend Dr. Pamela Dolan. So I told her that I was not going to give a bio of her in introduction. This was going to be from the heart. I was first introduced to Pamela before I moved here. Our first conversation was a Zoom conversation about whether I was going to intern or do my field study at St. Martin's in Davis, which is where she is the rector. And we decided at that time that I was called to another church. And then the following year, I approached Pamela with the crazy idea that I wanted to do something unusual, where I'd have one foot in the door of a church and the other foot in the door of campus ministry. And I asked if she would be willing to take that ride with me. And so under Pamela, I was a deacon, I was a seminarian. We went through some rough stuff going on in the community at that time. I've learned so much from Pamela, who became a friend from those times of being a mentor. And a lot of the stuff that I brought here around, creation care, our procession that we did, the Rogation procession last year, was inspired by the Rogation procession. I didn't even know what it was until I was with Pamela. And so that was inspired by my time with Pamela. And so that time with you was wonderful. And when this opportunity came to invite you here to be a part of my new space, we've been working on this for a long time just to figure out a way to get Pamela down here. So I'm thrilled. Yes. So I will let you talk about yourself.
It's so funny to hear Betsy talk about me as a mentor, because it was like she just came supercharged and ready to go, and it was like, yeah, you have great ideas, let's do it. So, but it's very generous of you. So I'm so delighted to be here to talk about my book a little bit, but I also want to make sure that you all get to talk and that I get to hear from you and to hear your questions. And as we were kind of deciding what the focus for tonight should be, I said, well, why don't I come late in Lent and look at the last chapter? So I'm assuming many of you have read at least some of the book up until that point. I know it's not, it's not required reading. I'm sure there's no quiz. So if you have questions about other parts of the book too, that's fine. It doesn't just have to be about chapter 5. But I thought I would start with a short reading and then try to make it as interactive as possible. I was actually imagining fewer people, so this is great, but it's just a little bit of a different setup. So
we've been talking about.
So we'll see how it goes. And we're like an hour-ish. Is that what we're aiming for? Okay. So this is just the beginning of chapter 5 of the book. Chapter 5 is called Hospitality and Justice. Whose land is it anyway? We've already looked a little at how gardens can build community, using the rich metaphor of soil as our starting point. In this chapter, we'll expand that vision even more into the areas of hospitality and justice work. Let's start by imagining a picnic table laden with food. It sits under the shade of an oak tree, offering welcome, comfort, and abundance on a warm, late summer evening. What food do you envision on that table? As a vegetarian and a gardener, I see a spinach salad with heirloom tomatoes, creamy avocados, and chunks of salty feta, a quinoa-based dish with pomegranate seeds and walnuts and a citrus dressing, lots of warm, crusty sourdough bread, some roasted veggies, and of course, a dessert featuring summer fruit, probably blackberries served in meringue boats with a dollop of creme fraiche and a sprinkling of brown sugar. I'm making myself hungry. Luckily, we've just eaten a delicious dinner. So. Are these foods in season? Can they be grown where you live? Next, I wonder who is sitting around the table. Is it just close friends or family? What if you were to invite neighbors or community members? How well do you know the people who live around you? Or maybe it's an affinity group of some kind, other gardeners or a knitting circle or a book club or people from your local church or synagogue or mosque. Do the people all look alike in terms of ethnicity, age range, race, and so on? How would you make room for strangers or even just for people very different from you? When I imagine this table welcoming people from my church, I know that the majority would fit within a certain narrow demographic, an older, mostly white, mostly well-educated bunch. But there would also be the new couple who joined our church during the pandemic lockdown when we were online only, and whose baby we recently baptized. Another family with 4 young kids, all of whom are seeking asylum in the United States after fleeing their war-torn homeland in Central America, and who've been part of our community for 3 years now. A student from the nearby university who is trying to figure out how their shifting sense of gender identity fits with their Christian faith. How much room is at your table for people significantly different from you? Where is the table located? Do you have space where you live, work, or worship where you might be able to set up a table outside and invite others? If not, let your imagination roam. Maybe this is a table at a nearby park or community garden, or a place where you would like to go but haven't been to yet. Then begin to ask yourself, what do you know about that land? Who owns it? For how long has it been theirs? Was it ever used for other purposes? Where your church or synagogue or other worship space now stands, was there once an orchard or a farm or anything about the health of your water? Do you know where your water comes from or anything about the health of your watershed? If you live in an area that experiences drought, as I do, have you considered how much water was needed to grow the food you're eating? What will be left on the table when the meal is over? Plates, utensils, food, scraps, napkins, what will happen to it next? My hope is that as we move through these layers of questions, the intimate connection between hospitality and justice is just beginning to reveal itself. Gardening is a spiritual practice that moves us beyond the realm of the personal to a concern for the land on which we grow our food and the people who will eat it, whether they are other members of our household or people you might never meet who will access it through a food pantry where you donate your produce. From there, it is almost impossible not to start thinking about why some people have access to gardens and some don't. Why some people have healthful, fresh produce readily available to them and others live in food deserts and so on. Just gonna pause there. When I first started writing this book, I don't think I was really thinking about hospitality and justice as connected. If you are in a seminary, if you're studying theology, if you're organizing your church ministries, those are often like in different buckets. You know, it's like, oh, hospitality is the people who put together coffee hour, put together lovely meals like this. Justice work that's a different group of people often, there may be some overlap, but they're thinking about issues out there. They're thinking about social justice and advocacy or peace work. And it really wasn't until I started telling the story of this garden that I helped create in Missouri that I realized how interwoven those two areas really are. And it came down to me for thinking through those questions that I was asking in this early part of the chapter. I knew that not everybody reading it would have a a garden that they were working in. Certainly not everybody would have a church garden, but I thought everybody gathers around a table at some time, and like that's a universal experience that most of us, if not all of us, can relate to. And it's also a very biblical space. It is so much a part of the story of our faith. Like, who sits at the table, and who else is there, and who has access to land? Those stories are woven through the Bible, but we don't always put the pieces together. And so, I was really delighted that Betsy said, yeah, let's talk about hospitality and justice, because I haven't actually talked about this part of the book with any other group. So it's really fun to kind of dive into this part of it. Just tonight at dinner, I heard a little bit about the garden that you have here in your lot, and was just hit over the head with the fact that it is actually one of these stories of where justice and hospitality come together. And you could probably tell the story better than I can, but do you want to share a little bit of what you told me?
I just have to, what you just said, hospitality and justice, and the gathering around the table, I have to share this experience that was very moving, profound, years ago. But we're literally, there are some oak trees out there that were carefully watered and babied by Richard Shook, who has now passed away. And he watered them and he tended them. And now Mr. Vang has raised the canopy, and there was a table under the table. And we would all have our Saturday work party, and we would be gathering around the table, and Mrs. Vang would bring her rice and they would spend the day there, and we would gather around the table, and they would welcome me to eat. And then we would talk about how are we going to eat this, how do you prepare, tell me, how do you cook this cucumber, or eat this cucumber that's giant, the size of a watermelon? And then she would say, and then there's another dish, and she would literally give me a recipe by pulling out different parts of the garden and saying, well, you take 2 of these, and 3 of these, and there's this, and then add some pork and salt, and stir it all together, and still my family loves it. It's called hot dish. So that's just one little example of gathering around the table and welcoming and learning about other people.
Yeah.
Reading this part made me think about St. Gregory of Nyssa, which is an Episcopal church in San Francisco. They actually have, when you walk into the building, their altar is right there in front of you, and then their baptismal font is beyond that, because they say that the table is first. We gather first, and then it goes to the baptism.
Yeah.
But that altar is not only used for the altar for service, it also becomes the coffee hour table. And then on Saturdays, it becomes the table for produce to sell to the community or to give to the community. So it kind of becomes a bit of a food bank, food pantry altar. And as you're describing this, I'm imagining, and it not only connects the hospitality and the feeding with justice, but what we actually do here.
Yeah.
And it's all wrapped up in that one altar table.
Yes.
That is meant for everything, not just this high holy thing that we can't touch, but this is actually where we gather and do the work that we're supposed to do.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful, because where is the tables in our stories of faith? I mean, ultimately, I think most of us zero in on that, what we call the Last Supper. That table is so much what becomes this table, what becomes our altar. And it started as people sharing the meal. I mean, it really did. So, I got goosebumps thinking about that. That's really cool. And to me, part of the linchpin between justice and hospitality has to do, I think, with welcome and with openness, and asking yourself over and over again, who is at the table? Who has access to land? Who has access to clean water and to fresh and healthful food? I mean, those are just things that many of us have been able to take for granted in our lives, but lots of people don't. And there are systems in place that make that the way it is, I grew up with all the food I ever needed and never had to think about it. And it wasn't until I was working in a garden where we were trying to grow food for other people at this church in Missouri that I was starting to investigate, like, where are the pockets of hunger in our neighborhood? I didn't know. Where are the closest food pantries? Where are the food deserts in our area? And getting to know that taught me so much more about the community that I was there to serve. I thought, well, we're doing a pretty good job. We thought we were, we were doing a good job. We were bringing in food to food pantries. We were having, drives for backpack supply. We were doing good stuff. But there's a whole invisibility to food security issues in a lot of communities. And so once you start sort of picking apart the threads, it both opens your eyes if you haven't been part of that experience, and also offers all these opportunities to get to know people. So I'll back up just a little bit. I don't want to assume that everybody's read everything in here, but I also don't want to bore you if you've read all the stories before. I was the rector of this church when we decided to start a garden there. There's a lot more about what I did in preparation for that, and wanting it to be a goat farm, which didn't work out, but that's okay. So we started this garden, and that was, for me, just a huge education around what it meant to, first of all, do something new, something that I didn't know very much about. I was not a gardener already, and I think it's wonderful for leaders to learn to be learners again, and to not always be the expert and not always be in charge. So that was a great experience. It was also just the very beginning of what kind of became my passion around issues of environment and creation care. I always thought I liked I liked nature, I liked going for hikes, I cared about stuff, but it wasn't until I cared at that sort of granular level, of like knowing what the soil was like and knowing what our water sources were. There's something about having that knowledge, or realizing where your lack of knowledge is, realizing where the gaps in your knowledge are, that I think really leads to a level of caring that's different. It's not abstract anymore. It's like you love this land, and then you start loving the food that it produces and loving the people who are caring for it, and it's just a virtuous cycle, as they say. So one of the stories that I tell in this chapter is about where kind of that justice part really became apparent. We were already doing a lot of work figuring out where we could give the food that we were growing, who was in need of food in our area, where were food pantries that would take fresh produce, because that's an issue sometimes, and just learning sort of all those food system questions. And then in 2014, in a nearby community, there was a police shooting. Michael Brown was a young man who was shot and killed. And it created a lot of change in the community. And it was a lot like, I think, much of the rest of the country, sort of the George Floyd's death had that kind of galvanizing effect, where people were talking about issues that maybe they hadn't been talking about in the broader culture. But for us in St. Louis, that was 2014. It was Michael Brown, and it was very close to home, and it really roiled the whole community. I mean, you couldn't not have an opinion on it or not be talking about it, and so trying to think about what was the role of land, why were there whole parts of St. Louis that were all white? Why were there whole parts of St. Louis where there were no good grocery stores? You know, all those things became much more urgent in the wake of that crisis in our community. It wasn't abstract anymore. It was really about how people's lives were being affected. And then again, the issue of like being at the table together. What could we do? What was our role to play? Within my own church, there was not uniform opinion about what we should do, how we should respond. But one thing that we knew we could do was take food. And I think sometimes that is like the gateway. You know, it's like everybody eats, everybody needs food. This was a community that was in crisis. A lot of the roads in and out of the town of Ferguson were closed, and a lot of the stores were closed. And so it was, you know, it was actually a necessity at that point. And St. Stephen's, the Episcopal church in town, did have a food pantry, and they were trying to keep it open a lot more days and provide a lot more food. And so connecting with them, being able to bring, we brought canned food as well, but we also brought some fresh food, and it was like, oh, this is our little, maybe in some ways insignificant offering, but it's of us. It's something that is authentically ours to give, and it brought people together. We received so much lovely feedback from people who said, you don't know how nice it was to have fresh tomatoes in that moment when it felt like everything was so awful. You know, it was just a little thing that made a big difference. We got that kind of feedback too when we would drop off food at one of the local food pantries. We loved, there was one near us that was set up, I think this is so cool when places can do that, it was set up more like a grocery store than like a place of handouts, you know, so the client would come in and they would get to take a couple of bags and say, oh, I'll grab this, I'll grab this. You know, they had agency, they had choice around what they were going to eat. And that is such a human need, that it's not just about the calories in, you know, it's about what do you like? What is familiar? What is comforting? What maybe comes from your culture that is not as easy for you to get here? And so that particular food pantry was set up for, it had refrigeration so we could bring in fresh produce. And sometimes we'd be dropping something off and somebody would be coming out and they'd say, oh, I didn't know you guys were coming. We love the stuff you grow. Can I go back in and just get a few things, you know? We'd say, sure, of course, you know. And it feels so good to have somebody say, yours are the best tomatoes. We love your peppers. We were growing hot peppers that some of the people in my church didn't really want to eat, but there were people who did really want to eat those, you know. Another thing was okra. That was very, very divisive. People either love okra or they hate okra. And so figuring out where people wanted okra, where people really didn't want okra it was kind of fun. But you know, you just feel so good. It's like, well, we had fun growing it. It was a joy. It was a beautiful thing for us, and it's making somebody's life better in that small way. Never avoiding or ignoring the larger systemic issues that are involved, actually using that as kind of our own experience as like a springboard into learning more about those, but still doing what we can on the ground while we can. I used to say that gardening builds community from the ground up, and I really believe that. When you can garden with other people, it's like there's a part of our DNA, I think, that just knows that that's part of what like being human is all about. It's like we go out there and we play around in the dirt with other people. To me, I think that's why I hadn't become a gardener before that. I don't really like doing it on my own really as much. I like doing it as a part of a team with a larger purpose. So that's some of what's going on in that, trying to think about hospitality and justice as two sides of the same God-inspired point. You know that it's about, like, these are attributes of God, and they don't have to be in these separate, like, silos, these different buckets. They're really interconnected. I'll pause for just a second because you guys had some great stories, and I want to make sure I hear some of those. Anything else about that? I mean, your story here with being able to offer a garden plot, a large garden plot, to a family that otherwise would not have that access, I think that's one of the great things that Episcopal churches and other churches are learning to do is there are so many different ways to organize a church garden. It can be what we did in St. Louis, where everybody's working on the same stuff at the same time, and you harvest it and you give it away. That's one way. Other churches do, we're going to have, a bunch of beds, and different families are each going to take a bed, and they're going to grow whatever they want. You can give the use of the land to a family or an organization, and there are just many, many ways to make use of this incredible resource that we have. Episcopal churches own an enormous amount of land in this country, and we don't always recognize the value of that, both in terms of, well, obviously we know that it's a good dollar value, but that there's social capital and community and relational capital that's in that land as well. And you can grow yummy stuff along, you guys have lots of land, but I mean, I've talked to people like at the cathedral in St. Louis where they're in the middle of the city, but they have some little areas. It's literally like between the sidewalk and the building. You can grow something there. You can grow beans instead of roses if you want to. So anyway, I saw people starting to look like they would want to talk in.
This is a story about your current parish, St. Martin's and Davis, and a failure of hospitality and justice. I was there, I don't remember how many years ago, but I was there for an ordination. And on half the campus, there was an ordination feast with the best catered meal in the world. The other half of the campus, they were feeding the homeless with white bread and ham and a stale apple. And I started asking questions about why the separation. Why can't we, for a great celebration, bring the groups together? And I wasn't a member of the congregation. I just, nobody wanted to answer that. It was just, and I've since seen a number of other churches seeing the same thing in different dioceses where there is a feast going on one side of the campus and people being fed with the dregs on the other side. Yeah. And it is so striking.
Yeah.
So the other part of that story, a good friend of mine came down with cancer while she was in seminary, and she was a member of Trinity Cathedral, Sacramento, went to CDSP. Her dream was working with the homeless. As she got sicker, it was the group of the homeless that held activities for her. Wow. A spaghetti dinner for her to pay the expenses that she couldn't as a student. When she died, it was my responsibility to plan her memorial at Trinity. And one of the things that, we did invite the entire homeless community that she had worked with to the service. Some of them were willing to come, some, I wouldn't step foot in the church. But they had the courtyard there where many of them spent the day. So we planned the service so at communion, the clergy would take communion out to the courtyard and offer it to everybody and to the people who were serving in the kitchen, preparing the food, so that everyone was.
Wow, that's a beautiful story. And I'll talk about the first story you shared as well. It is absolutely those moments, when I think the church has to come to grips with its own blindness, its own unwillingness to see what is right in front of you. And often it takes somebody from outside of the community to notice. And if you're brave enough to speak up, I think that's a great gift. It
I
is.
don't know if my speaking up then had any effect,
Yeah.
but, I tried.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how long ago it was and all that. I know that the meals that are served there now, so St. Martin's in Davis, my parish, began a ministry for homeless members of the community that became something called Davis Community Meals and Housing. It's a totally separate nonprofit now that I think has a bigger budget than ours. It was really successful, which is fantastic. But still, 3 days a week, the meals take place at St. Martin's. And one of the things I've been doing mostly since COVID, is trying to shift a little bit back into reconnecting the parish to that. Because when the organization grew bigger than us, then it was like, well, they're on their own, they're doing great things. But we never want to think of them as like a tenant. We want a much deeper connection than that. So today, if you go in on a Tuesday morning, and none of this is due to me, so it's just the way things are now. DCMH is what we call them, or that's their acronym. DCMH brings in food from all around the community, and so they do gleaning of fresh food, and they also get lots of donations from restaurants, from grocery stores, what have you. And they have a cook assigned for each meal, and they're in there on Tuesday morning sorting all this huge amount of donations. They take over the whole parish hall and figure out how it's going to work for that day. And it's not quite as big on Thursdays or Saturdays, but often there's still stuff from Tuesday that they can use. And they're homemade meals, they're actual dinners. And we had to stop some of that during COVID, but then when they started it back up, we never stopped feeding people, but it was like Candace sandwich from 6 feet away, kind of thing for a while. But now that everything's been back up and running for some time, we're seeing some real improvements around that. So now, to me, the next step is, how do we stop thinking of it as their meal and maybe start thinking of it more as our meal? Like, we can show up and not just help prepare food or serve it, we could eat together. To me, that's the thing you have to still work on breaking down, so that it's not this great feast, like you said, and then this kind of crummy bologna sandwich. And it's also not, we're giving this great meal to these people. No, we're just all eating together. How do we get to that point? And it's a challenge, but we're doing some things like having more days that it's just St. Martin's members helping out instead of having one member of the church, there each time. Let's get a whole group of us. I think there's something about working on a project together that it's more than the sum of its parts. It energizes things, and so we'll see. So we're working on it. Yeah, great examples though. Oh, you did end up right in the sun. Oh, darn. Anybody who needs to shift or move around, please do that.
She's in the spotlight.
Well, as you were talking about land and where did this land come from, I don't know everything, and Janie can speak to that some more. But being part of the garden experience, I learned, for example, that the first thing they grew here was melons, because it's just perfect for growing melons, corn roots. And then agriculture has done its thing.
Sure.
But now, this is maybe a little controversial now, but we're in the middle of I think, as a church, deciding that we need to sell that piece, and it needs to be developed because that's where the money is and the value is. And just philosophically, I just find it so ironic that the beauty of what we're talking about is in dollars and cents in these times has no value. because it's, it's on borrowed time.
Feel that same way.
Right? JD and I are on the same page. Couldn't we, why isn't it more valuable to have a garden or a strawberry patch? Why isn't it worth more? And that's painful.
It is. These are really hard conversations, absolutely. And we don't value land in that non-dollars and cents way that you're talking about as much as, as a culture. It's not just the church, it's throughout. We've sort of commodified everything, and yet that is the world that we live in too, you know? So it's tough. It's hard to know sometimes what the right thing is. We have access to some land. My church does in Yolo County, about half an hour from the church, and thinking about a ranch that's been growing almonds for a long time. What's the right thing to do with that land? There are a lot of limits that different states and municipalities put on how you can use land. You have to deal with all of those kinds of issues around. We can't actually put up housing because it's agricultural land, which is a good thing, but we need houses. Those are just not easy conversations. And those intangible values that we feel when we're connected to our land are, it's hard to put a price tag on that. I do think that, whether it's a huge lot or whether it's, just a little bit of backyard somewhere, I think there are practices of, gardening is obviously my thing for how you really get connected to the land. But I think it's also, it's great to do, to research, so where I actually thought you were going about at first was to learn about, when I talk about whose land is this anyway, ultimately the answer is it's God's, right? The ultimate answer is it doesn't belong to any of us. Anything that we have is a gift, and land more than anything. And that is the land ethic that you see in the Bible if you sort of strip away some of our cultural assumptions about things like having dominion over the earth and what that means. But I think about things like somebody who's owned an orchard for 100 years, and that's a deep and rich connection, and it was somebody else's land before that. There was very little uninhabited land in California. We don't realize that. But when you start doing that research, when you start learning about the history of the indigenous peoples of California, it's like, oh, it was not only inhabited, it was being cultivated, just in ways that look different, than our sort of Western European ways of cultivating land. So recognizing that, it was in 2020 or 2021, as we were in lockdown and a lot of questions, kind of the racial reckoning that was going on in the country. I watched a webinar that some part of the Episcopal Church put on. I forget who hosted it, but somebody asked the question, can we even embody social justice on stolen land? And that question has been, ringing through my ears for a long time too. It's like, we have layers and layers and layers of work to do. But yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. There are all these questions in the back of the book, but I'd rather hear what your questions are, so that if there's any, instead of me asking you, but
I might share that Creation Care team for, 6 months or longer, probably longer, has talked about converting a part of the landscaping to native plants.
oh yeah.
And pollinator gardens, butterfly gardens.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot to it, and people don't want something that's ugly and,
Right.
you know, especially not around Easter, so we keep putting off doing anything. But our goal has been to try to cut back on the amount of water we use in the lawns and plant plants that don't need a whole lot of water and that can help with the biodiversity. It's not producing food per se for people, but it's producing food for other creatures.
Yeah. No, that's a wonderful use of land, and it is complicated again. It's our whole idea of what's aesthetically pleasing. Like you said, people want it to look pretty, and we've grown up with a certain, for just several generations, you know, certain vision of what like a well-landscaped property looks like. And, you know, it takes a little shifting of your lenses to sometimes see a native pollinator garden which may be dormant for part of the year and look like there's nothing happening there and it's kind of dead and what's wrong, and nothing's wrong, it's all asleep, it's going to come back to life, you know, we believe in resurrection. But it is, you know, there are parts of, probably in California too, but I know parts of the country, other parts of the country where, you know, you cannot just put wildflowers in your front yard. You have to have lawn, and it has to look a certain way. And if that takes lots of water and pesticides, oh well, you know, that's what you're required to do. So there's a lot of cultural work, you know, that's got to go on, I think, for people to get comfortable with a different aesthetic and just, you know, recognize where you are. That's part of like, where are you? I mean, we just aren't that grounded in our worlds anymore. And so to like know, like when I was in Missouri, it rained all summer. You know, of course we could grow 2,000 pounds of food in a small garden. It was like, it was just like coming out of our ears, you know, but that's not what it's like in Davis in the summers. And so you really have to, there's a respect, I think, about like the land, let the land teach us some things and work with it instead of against it all the time. And there are some beautiful, California has some beautiful native plants. You can get used to it, but yeah. But that is also a really good way. I mean, growing food isn't the only good thing you can do with land, for sure. Yeah.
That's one of the things. So talk about how much land is needed. My understanding, and those of you who were here when this happened, is the reason we are set so far back is because there had to be, Janie, maybe you, I don't know if you know about this, but we had to be set so far back from the road.
Because of like zoning and stuff like that?
I guess.
Well, I mean, actually, you know, the little house right over here,
Yeah.
that used to have a nice big lawn in front. The road has been widened
Okay,
several
so
times.
yeah.
So
Probably an easement.
the city had an easement for.
Yeah. Okay. So we have this giant yard out front that nobody runs in place or anything. And so one of the conversations we've had, and by the way, if you ever want a beautiful labyrinth to walk, I would invite you to go to Davis, to St. Martin's, because they have a beautiful labyrinth. But is to make a labyrinth out there with more native growings around it, trying to make it, and the purpose of having it there versus back here is to connect with the community. Because if it's back here, people drive by and don't see it. So how do we have a place where people can drive by and say, what's that? Maybe I'll stop there. We've talked about making it wide enough, not only for wheelchairs, but that makes it wide enough for a stroller.
Yeah.
And so parents walking down can say, let's go over to the labyrinth and, you know, sit on the bench over in that, like, I have a dream of each area being sensory.
Yes.
So like, this is the sound, there's maybe some chimes or water, and this is the feel, this is the smell, this is the whatever. But let's go sit in this part of the garden and have our lunch today, and walk around and then maybe meet other people. But really making that labyrinth, because sometimes labyrinths can feel like they're supposed to be a personal, quiet contemplative thing, which it is.
Yeah.
But I think it can also, it's been amazing to me to walk a labyrinth and I see other people coming and I'm like, oh, bummer. I thought I was going to be, by myself. However, one of the best times was the year I was with you. We did for Lent, for this kind of thing, for Lent, we did different types of prayer each Wednesday.
Right.
And the last one was labyrinths and walking prayer. And we had it all lit up. And the whole group, which was about 20 of us, we all went out there. And it is a nice size labyrinth. And I thought, well, this is not going to work because we're going to constantly, it is one of my favorite times that I've ever walked a labyrinth. And the reason is because you find that what you do is you make space for others.
Just kind of,
and you just move over, they move over, each of you are moving over just a tiny bit, but just enough to make space for the other. And you can hear others breathing. You could hear their footsteps. And so actually walking a labyrinth with others is quite a spiritual experience, even though you might be within your own mind. You are still in this community of people walking, moving, making space, hearing the breathing, the steps. So it's just an interesting...
No, that's a lovely reflection. I mean, making space is actually one of the definitions of hospitality that I work with in this chapter. And that does have to do with how we use our land to be more welcoming, more community-facing, more gardens and labyrinths and other outdoor spaces are often that kind of liminal, people who might not want to come inside a church building, but they're okay using it, using something on the grounds. I get that. In Davis, I hear that all the time. Somebody hears I'm the priest at St. Martin's and they go, oh, I walk over there. I have a doctor's appointment at that place behind you. And then I come walk the labyrinth, or I sit in that nice shady area. I'm like, that's our columbarium, but that's okay.
It is a very lovely shaded columbarium.
And what a gift for a church to be able to do that. It's not, I was going to say it's a free offering. Of course, those of the people on my Buildings and Grounds Committee can say none of it's free. It's a lot of work to keep things nice and all that. But there aren't that many places that people have in our culture right now that are just for the taking. It's like no expectations, no membership, you don't have to pay anything. You just use it. It's just there for you. And I also, what you were saying about walking a labyrinth with other people, I'm the same way where I'm always like, oh, what a beautiful spiritual experience. But I was trained as a labyrinth facilitator at Grace Cathedral, and we would have, I think we had at least 40 or 50 people on that labyrinth sometimes when we were being trained. And you sort of feel like when it really is flowing, it's like a dance, It's like, you just don't even know why. Oh, I'm over here now, and that person's over there. We're going to be fine. And I think a lot of work that we do as a community has that potential in it.
Sometimes we're walking together. Now we're walking in this way, and now we're walking away.
And working in the garden at Shepherd Farm was that same way. Where I loved when I could go out there by myself, and I bring my prayer book, and I just feel like I was one with the universe, And then I'd go out there, and there'd be people working, and you start talking to somebody that maybe you don't know that well, and it's easier to talk to them because you're just side by side. You're doing a little weeding. You're not, you don't just sit there at coffee hour, and then you find out there's some. Sorry, that's me at coffee hour. It's not you, I'm sure. You're all right. But you find out something about them. You learn about why they like to garden. That maybe they live in an apartment now. And they don't have their own garden. And you learn things about people by being kind of in that kind of working, kind of social, not really super structured time. It's just relationships take time. And we're all, on such a schedule for the most part. Really is needed for something else. Yes.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Not about elaborate, but that's how I feel in my at the lakes at Lodi Lake. We have a nature trail, and it's just peaceful. And I like to go early morning, like when the sun come up. There's deer, there's wildlife. I'm closer to God.
Yeah.
I feel closer to my husband who passed away 6 years ago, and because he passed away when I was driving him to hospital in front of the lake, and in my head I was like, oh, Patrick went to the lake. And so I feel closer when I go there, talk to him and stuff, but talk to God and everything. That's what actually pushed me to come here as well. I was walking at the lake and feeling closer to God and everything. But that's how I feel at the lake. I feel like people that go there, in the beginning I would go and people were going as early. I wanted to go alone, be alone, and people would still be there. And I'm like, who's the other weirdo here? No, I'm just kidding. I'm like, well, what's your deal? No, I'm just kidding. What I mean? But once I start getting used to people, I realize we're all sharing this space. They came here for a reason, because it does for them what it probably does for me. It might do other things, but it's all positive.
Yeah.
It's all love. Yeah. No, I'm not planting or doing anything, but there's wildlife, there's trees, there's everything there. And that's how I feel. Yeah. So when I'm walking with those people, or they're walking toward me, I'm walking away, and we're doing all this, that, and the other, running, you can hear them breathing when they're running, you can, it's just a community. But, and sometimes I talk to people, sometimes they talk to me, sometimes there's usually groups of people together. But I say hi, good morning to everybody as I walk by, Buenos dias. No. I do buenos dias, hello, I do it all. But anyways, that sounds very familiar to me.
That's lovely. I mean, I brought a bunch of books with me. I have to take them home again, but some of them really talk about what happens to us when we're outside, like why it's so good for us. A really excellent one that doesn't have a faith component, but it's called The Well-Gardened Mind. This is really about kind of the psychology of what happens to us when we're outside, when we're working in the soil. It's really well researched. It's really excellent. So there are physical things that happen. There are psychological things that happen. We breathe better. Our heart rates go down. I mean, there's been a lot of really great research around this. And I think when people would say, oh, well, I don't need to go to church because I find God outside.
Right. Yeah, me. No. I used to do that.
It's like the church is going to die because people are going hiking. It's like, well, why not both? Why not have those two things interact and strengthen each other? Because where do I find God? Absolutely at the communion table. Absolutely in the community of faith. And I get rejuvenated. I get, refreshed. I get excited when I get to go outside and experience God there as well. And then bring that back into church. It can really feed each other. So
God this time around is showing me his love through community.
Yeah.
Because before it was very eternal for me.
Yeah.
I had a spiritual awakening. It was all dramatic. But for real, it felt in me, oh, this is such a big deal. But now it's more community. Yeah. So where I might be angry at my God right now from my husband, maybe some days I am, some days I'm not. It's just whatever. But coming here showed me that no, he's with me, and he's showing me his love through my community here at St. John's. Wow. Well, and that's how it's working for me right now. Yeah. I don't know how long that's going to last, you guys. I'm just kidding.
That's what I'm hearing.
No, but I mean, but that's what it's doing. And look, I'm here after 2 years, and I just still am loving it. And
Wow.
it's nice to be around people that could express themselves.
Yeah.
In that way with God and stuff.
Yeah.
I come from the gay community. We don't have a lot of that.
Yeah.
So.
Of course. Yeah.
You have to find them.
Right.
Find them, and then you want to date them. No, I'm just kidding. They're like, oh, there's one.
It's so true. I mean, but so much of our society more and more is that way, where people have either no association with religion or they have really negative stereotypes about religion, and we've earned that, unfortunately, in the church. It's not just
right.
I look at young people, and this is another thing that I think Creation Care does, is it's like if they see you walking the walk and not just talking the talk, that's something that young people really, really care about, is the environment, and they're like, oh, churches can care about that too? Oh, that's amazing, like who knew? And I have 20-something-year-old kids, and they will tell their friends as they're getting to know somebody, oh yeah, my mom's a priest, and the number one answer they get, or question or response they get is, tell me about your religious trauma. That must have been horrible. Like they just have, they have such scary ideas about what church is, and so
it's so sad.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, sometimes there are reasons for that, right? It's not just like made up, but to be the counterexample, to be a church where it's like you can come as you are, you can work in the garden, you can be who you are. We're not forcing membership on you, or we're just here to be part of the community together. And God is going to be in the midst of that, and God is going to look different for you and for me and for somebody else. That that is a tremendous gift that I think our tradition has to offer.
I like it because it's very different than before. It's not like going to a Catholic church where it's all. That makes sense. But this is very easy.
And there are people who are going to want to be in the garden, and there are people
tradition.
who want to be at Altar Guild, and you got it all. You got it all. I see somebody's hand there.
This is a little bit of an aside, but you're talking about young people and not having a very good view of religion. I don't know if it was NPR or whether it was a discussion with a professor who was working with young people and trying to understand their isolation that they're experiencing. It's quite profound for young people. And it kind of made me laugh, but it was, once there was the church and the community that was part of the church, and young people had a place to go. So his recommendation, now we don't have to have religion, but we have to replicate that place and moment in time. I was like, it was just, but I still, it was very uplifting for me to say that was recognized, that a church was for so long of a time, it's been a beautiful place for young people. And kids do like to work and be outdoors because they don't always have those experiences as part of their family. So.
Yeah, absolutely. We're doing our vacation Bible school this summer at the Methodist Church because they have a big garden, so we'll be doing a garden-based VBS, and it's a natural for young people to want to be outside, to want to be physical, and they don't. So many people don't have that opportunity. I mean, it's one thing. I think Davis schools almost all have gardens, yada yada yada. But a lot of studies around how people are educated now is like there's so much sitting, there's so much hold still, focus on the screen, whatever it is, and we've just lost a lot of that connection to how great it is to get outside. And you can learn so much. You can do math in a garden. You can do science in a garden. You can do theology in a garden. It's all of those things. Cooking. I said you can
read in a garden.
Yes, you can read in a garden.
The science part, one of the oddities that happened, I have 5 acres out in Harold, and previous people had tossed trash in a little depression, and I scratched it out into a pond that's probably almost as big as this chapel.
Wow.
And noticed we also have horses, so there's lots of compost. Well, when moving that around, I uncovered some tiger salamanders. The Pacific tiger salamander's endangered. I made a habitat for them.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. Cool. And what was growing?
Tiger salamander.
And there are wonderful stories like that about how much the earth can come back when it's just given a little tending, a little love and attention. You know, amazing things can happen.
Well, you look out at the pond right this time of year. I don't have any fish in it, but there's things leaving in the pond. It's salamanders.
Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh.
So
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out why I had fish that big in my pond. I mean, the egrets and the blue herring really enjoy this.
I didn't know that salamanders slept.
Well, I didn't know before either.
It is, and we have choir members who need to get out of the choir. But do we have somebody from the creation here? We have a lot of people from the creation.
Charlene.
Which one? Skipper. Just a little something. Handmade and bought, and we really appreciated you sharing your story with us over these weeks. So thank you so much.
By thanking all of you, because it's a thrill to get to come talk about the book and talk about gardening and God and all those good things. So thank you so much, and
Thank you. And I always forget to say, I was ordained at St. Martin's. Yes, the day before Pamela went on sabbatical. We needed to make sure that we got that part done
my
before
sabbatical will start on June 23rd. It was like the next day.
Thank you all.
Yeah.